Hello, welcome everyone to this morning's class. We're having a little bit of internet connectivity issues, so if you wouldn't mind giving us a moment while we get settled, that would be great. Everyone, welcome. And if you haven't already muted yourself, please go ahead and do that. Okay, great. Looks like things are in working order. We're really excited to have this class today. I really want to welcome everyone. It's been a pretty exciting evening and morning for us here in Sonoma County. We had like a big wind warning and lightning storm last night. So it just is really fitting that we're doing a class on fire preparation this morning. And blessedly, we are experiencing some rain, which is really unusual and smacks of climate change. But I know that, yeah, the land is really grateful to receive the water since it's been so dry. So yeah, it just feels like a really good time to talk about resiliency and fire preparedness and how we can support ourselves, our bodies, our communities, and the land that we steward. And speaking of land, I'm speaking to you from Southern Pomo territory in Santa Rosa. And this land is part of a federation of tribes called the Great Rancheria. There's a few folks or a few tribes that have come together under that banner. And if you haven't done the exploration of where on the land that you are on, what Native communities are the caretakers and stewards of that land, I encourage you to do so. And if you have done that, that's excellent. I would love to see where folks are coming from. So if you want to drop that into the chat, that would be really great to see where folks are coming from. Both, yeah, their indigenous land, or if you don't know that, where you're coming from. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. Yeah, so go ahead and get started. Oh yeah, great. Malone territory, nice to see you, Gretchen. Southern Pomo, Coast Miwok, great, yeah. Remitush, Ohlone land, Nassau Peninsula, Chichenia Ohlone, great. Welcome, everyone. And yeah, in the spirit of having land acknowledgements, not just be an acknowledgement and leaving it at that, there's lots of actions that we can do to help caretake and recognize our various roles here, whether you are of settler descent or not. There's lots of ways to become involved with the efforts for liberation and rematriation in our various areas. And in sort of the Ohlone realm, there's the Shimi land tax that is organized by the Sogoreté Land Trust, and that's a great way for folks who are of settler descent to help support rematriation projects and pay a tax as settlers of this land. So, and yeah, and fire is a really big part of the indigenous natural ecology for this region of California. We may touch on that today. And so I'd love to introduce our amazing teachers who will be guiding you through this exploration today. And if folks want to wave in their video, that would be great. If not, that's okay too. So Madeline is a artist, educator, herbalist whose work lies somewhere at the crossroads between ecology, the body, and self-determination. Her work comes into being through the Community Medicine Cabinet, which is the home of her plant medicine since 2014. And Madeline describes the cabinet as having 3 shelves, housing classes, clinic, and care products. And Madeline lives and works in Southern Pomoe Territory, Santa Rosa, actually at Madeline's home right now, blessedly, with their plant friends and menagerie. So thank you, Madeline, for sharing your experience and your wisdom. And we also have Stasha with us today. Stasha is a community-centered clinical herbalist, medicine maker, apothecarist, and educator practicing in the Chochenyo Ohlone territory in so-called Oakland, California. Stasha has been studying herbal medicine since 2006 and sees clients in free or sliding scale clinics for the last 12 years. And Stasha prioritizes harm reduction and focuses on complex clinical conditions. And both of these wonderful teachers have a lot of experience in working with oh no.
Okay, it looks like Sam is...
Okay, I'm still here. I thought I lost it, but it's still here. Yeah, the internet connectivity.
It doesn't help that we're like in these lightning stormy times too, so please bear with us, folks.
Can you see me now?
You're really, really cutting in and out, Sam. So maybe in the spirit of that, we'll transition over to Stasha talking about honoring fire. Thank you for the intro. And Sam will get back to us with some information about who we are as a Bay Heart Collective.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm now paranoid about having internet connectivity. I feel like this is kind of the hallmark of our modern era. Wondering if everyone can hear us or if we're pixelated. Okay, so yeah, I just want to start by honoring fire. I think that fire is a really important part of the ecology, and that the fact that fire is so out of control these days has many reasons. But I just want to take a moment here. We'll talk about that sort of more later, but I just want to take a moment to just honor the power of fire and the cleansing effects. Fire gives us warmth, sustains us, supports the land, and it's an essential part of the life cycle of some plants, activating their seeds to grow. So it can be really scary when it's near us and the smoke affects us intensely, which we'll talk about. But after saying that, I just wanted to say that, so I worked on this class with with the 2 people who are hosting, and then also started the idea with my friend L'Oreal and Klamath Siskiyou Herbal Alliance, which is at KSH Herbal Alliance on Instagram. So I wanted to give a shout out to her. And I went down a rabbit hole in studying for this class, and I realized that we could teach, 6-hour or longer workshop on this. So 3 hours feels almost nowhere near long enough to fit in all the things. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about the background, what comes up ambiently and internally. And next class, we'll spend more time talking about body systems and specific herbs. We decided to do it that way just to honor the idea of holistic health, which we all practice in. So everything is inextricably linked. It's very difficult to separate one thing from the other. And so we need to talk about the whole context, the background, when we're talking about herbs, right? We don't just simply take things symptomatically. We're trying to address the whole picture. There are some things in this that are out of our control, like wildfire season more generally. And so we're going to work within that context. So the reasons why we think it's important to teach this class is basically the possible future or the future is now. So I have tried to teach this class a few times when it hasn't been fire season. The goal was basically to get people prepared before fire season. And what I noticed was a kind of collective amnesia, or like looking away from fire possibilities. Like, we don't want to think about this. It's not happening now. And so we're going to really underscore the importance of preparation. We feel it's really important to be ready because there's fatigue from stress and reduced problem solving activities from less oxygen, right? And so we'll go through that probably in the second class. But anyways, I just want to say it's really great everyone's here, and that it's important to prepare in advance of exposure to smoke. So I'm excited to be talking about this with you all. Madeline?
Hi, let me just, there we go. Good morning, everybody. Hello. I'm like toggling to the screen where I can see all your faces who have video. So hello to the familiar and unfamiliar faces. My name is Madeline Berg, and I am a mixed Latina herbalist based in Santa Rosa. I am so happy to be doing this class today, and I also want to be open about the fact that it's a little bit personal for me. And so this is the first time that I've taught a fire-related class since my family being impacted by the Tubbs fire. And coming on the wake of this like really windy dry lightning storm, which we don't really experience very much in the Bay Area. It's if you've lived in or traveled in the East Coast or the Midwest, you're a little bit more familiar with dry lightning than we are here. And so the kind of high stakes fire risk feelings that I was feeling last night are carrying with me a little bit today. So just to name that's where I'm at. And it's kind of ironic that I spent my yesterday preparing for this class instead of like getting my gears moving towards fire season. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that kind of preparedness means. One thing that we're not covering in this class is we're not going to have time to go into the prevention piece, the larger ecological piece that we as people who love plants can begin to understand, the process of stewarding land and right relationship with fire in particularly California. We don't have time to cover that. So we're going to be talking about the preparedness and then the actual moment where we're experiencing fire and what we can do about it, as well as what comes after. Because if you have been impacted by fire, one thing that you know deeply is that the experience of the fire tends to stick with you. And so we'll talk about some strategies, both physically and emotionally, for working with that. And today we're really, like Stasha said, we're setting the stage, and then in 2 weeks we're going to get deeper into the plants. So my hope today is to talk about the basic prep that goes in both thinking about lifestyle planning, like having a go bag and what that might look like, some filtration, and a little bit of story time and some story around emotional support. And then we'll get to go deeper next time. So you're welcome to put your questions in the chat, and Sam Wise will be supporting us in kind of curating that and answering any questions that come up. And for now, I'm gonna pop into screen sharing, and we'll go a little bit deeper in talking about the effects of smoke. And first, Stasha, did you have more to say about honoring fire? No. Okay. So, hi. It feels like it might be nice just like put your feet on the ground if they're not on the ground, take a deep breath and have a grounding and welcoming moment. So this is an invitation for all of you in whatever way works for you to just take a quiet moment to land with me. So we'd like to start with a question, which is, what have you learned from past fire seasons and what are you bringing into this one? And to do this, you can go to the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on reactions and raise your hand, and we'll like call on you. So if anyone wants to jump in with an answer to what have you learned from past fire seasons that you're bringing into this one, that's where we're going to start today. Feeling quiet. Okay. Abigail, can you jump in?
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Hi. I've learned that I never really had like a good collection of herbs ready in time. I feel like I didn't start early enough with just the long-term preparation, taking things, and found that I'd be kind of scrambling last minute to get things together. And I had a lot of resistance around the preparation that I had to work through, like the physical preparation, like getting things together in a place where they'd be ready and things like that. So I found I was working with some physical, like just some resistance internally, and also just the need to figure out what to get ready ahead of time.
Yeah. Can I get a show of hands for folks on video? How many people have like some kind of resistance to the idea of getting ready, or like a procrastinating instinct or anything like that? Yeah. Yeah, so I see some thumbs up and some raised hands. It's definitely, you're definitely not alone in that. Yeah. Okay. Let's take one more person. So if anyone, I think because there's so many people on the call, it's easier if you just popcorn and unmute. If someone wants to pop in, I'll give it a couple seconds and then we'll transition if no one has anything else to contribute. But thank you, Abigail. Okay, so I'd like to just give a little bit of context for what this fire season is, because this fire season is complicated by a number of factors, but a big one that I'm sure many of you have spent some time thinking about is what the interaction between COVID and this fire season is. For starters, N95 masks that have become so commonplace in the last 4 years in the Bay Area as something that you wear during fire season aren't as available and are really important to be available for healthcare workers. There's kind of a complication there in terms of access to protective gear. There's also just the already with the virus, there's a way that anxiety can cause feelings of constriction in your breathing, and worrying about having COVID can be a way that you can kind of manifest that sensation, which can also be a symptom, which is exacerbating in itself. And then you add fire season and potential smoke exposure onto that. I think that there's a way in which it is complicated, and it's going to feel more complicated if we're really experiencing smoke this year, as some parts of California are right now. Parts of LA, Siskiyou County, smoky currently, where the chest constriction that you're feeling is going to be difficult to untangle from anxiety, coronavirus, and smoke exposure. And so that is just one more reason to wear a mask if you have access to one, and one more reason to really do the preventative care practices and the emotional and nervous system practices, be them herbs or other kinds of practices that build your resilience. On to you, Stasha. So Stasha is going to talk to us about the effects of smoke.
Well, I'm wondering, so we all have felt the effects of smoke, I imagine, living where we live, or we've seen that. So what are some things that you've noticed? If you wanted to type some symptoms into the chat, I'll just also be listing them so we don't, just in case people are shy, we're not waiting. Some is like watery or dry eyes, persistent cough, phlegm, wheezing, scratchy throat, sinuses, headaches, shortness of breath, so any kind of like lung irritation or asthma attack. There can sometimes be irregular heartbeat, chest pain, or fatigue, which is Madeline also touched on with anxiety. Migraines, definitely. So there's constriction, fatigue. So we're going to talk a lot about the different kinds of preparations that we can use to address some of these symptoms, while we also talk about the preventative measures that we can take to mitigate them beforehand so that our bodies are more resilient, our mucous membranes are better lubricated, etc. And then exposure to smoke can increase the risk of cardiovascular and respiratory events requiring an emergency room or emergency visit, especially in at-risk groups. So that includes people already living with asthma, COPD, pneumonia, bronchitis. And it can also increase the risk of developing cardiovascular and respiratory diseases down the line. So this is why we're focusing on prevention. But before we do, we're just going to go through. Madeline, do you mind sharing the screen to the red flags?
Yeah, I'm all toggled to do that. So there we go. And I'm opening.
So you can read this, but I'll just read it with you. So these are reasons to seek outside assistance. So rapidly worsening breathlessness, like someone can't catch their breath and it's not improving. Reluctance to talk or difficulty talking with breathlessness. So that's a sign that the oxygen levels are low. Noisy breathing, wheezing, or stridor. And I wrote there Darth Vader breathing. So it feels a lot louder, and that it's with a lot of pressure. And then the cardiovascular events are the crushing chest pain lasting more than 20 minutes. So that is a sign of a myocardial infarction. So things you can look for with that is pallor or grayness, nausea, vomiting, sweating. Then sudden stabbing chest pain is an ER visit, and sudden onset tearing chest pain. And then one thing that is sometimes harder to notice is the sudden swelling of ankles or lower legs. So severe edema and breathlessness, that can be a sign of congestive heart failure. We just think it's important to put these here because while we're giving, or herbal advice. There are some things that are just emergencies and need outside assistance. So next we're going to talk about like kind of like lifestyle tips for smoke. So things that you can do to make your time. Well, first off, are there any questions about these red flags? Okay. I can't see everybody, so hopefully Madeline just interrupt me if there is a question. Okay. So next week, we're going to talk a lot about, we're going to go kind of body system by body system and talk about, you know, the main points of why they're relevant. Well, we know why they're relevant, but why we want to talk about them with smoke. So I'm going to sort of talk about that a little bit, but we're going to talk about actions briefly. So I just want to say that these lifestyle tips, there is some amount of privilege in them, right? Like the number one thing that if you look about how to deal with smoke is to leave the area, right? That is certainly not possible for everyone. And that is less possible or near impossible for a lot of people. So if someone is at higher risk, if they have COPD or they know that they have heart problems, it is advised that they leave the area. And I think also these tips kind of take into consideration like access to electricity, transportation, people's finances, etc. So what is right for one person may not be accessible to another. So we're also going to talk about different ways of mediating that. So stay inside, filter the air, close windows and doors. You can also add ambient steam to the air. We'll talk about steams more in depth later, but it can be as simple as putting a big pot of water on the stove and adding, you can add plants, you can add essential oils. You just want to add ambient steam to your environment because smoke is very drying. So some herbs that Madeline and I talked about too, I mean, really you could go down a long list. This list could be very long, but the ones that came to mind for me were lavender, bay leaves, because that's what I have access to, eucalyptus, rosemary, thyme, cedar, pine, whatever you have kind of around you in your area. And we're going to talk more about this, but this also just gives kind of, we're doing some foreshadowing of the next class, but expectorant. So herbs to think about with dry cough would be like a soothing expectorant. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, expectorants assist lungs in removing excess mucus. When they contain mucilage, they are said to be relaxing and can be appropriate for dry, irritable, or hot conditions. Okay, I'm speaking fast. I have that tendency. Sorry if I'm going too fast. Let me know if you want me to slow down. So if you're outside, wash clothes as soon as possible and expose body parts and when you return to the house. Next week, we're going to go over each of the individual chemicals that are found in wildfire smoke. But I think it's useful for learning to hear things a couple of times. So I'm also just going to say that you want to be focusing herbally on hepatics and lymphatics. So you want liver support and support your body's capacity for elimination through alternatives. And you also want to move the lymph as much as possible. And that's important as the COVID backdrop as well. Other ways that you can help, you can stay on top of things is to track the air quality using Air Now. They've done a lot of work on that website in the last couple of years, and it's actually a little bit easier to use. And if something is above 100, you might want to consider staying inside. And if it's above 150, you probably should. And just also want to reiterate that I know that's not possible for everyone. And so this is where some harm reduction techniques will come in handy when we talk about later. And then Madeline already touched on this, but using an N95 filter or a P100 filter, especially when exerting yourself.
And one thing to just jump in there with is that depending on your pre-existing conditions, it might actually not be in your best interest to wear an N95. So particularly people with some kinds of cardiovascular and respiratory diseases, it can place in the amount of increased difficulty in gas exchange that a mask, an N95 causes can put too much strain on your heart and lungs. So that's something to be aware of as well in terms of this conversation around accessibility and harm reduction. It's multifaceted.
Yeah, and I also just want to address something that Paolo said on the chat, which is that there's been discrepancies with the air quality sites. And I do remember, I have had that experience as well. I remember every single day 2 years ago in November when smoke was really bad in the Bay Area, every single day the forecast would say clear tomorrow, which was obviously not true. And then it would change a lot through the day. I mean, possibly that has to do, I think has to do with the way that they track that. It changes. I think they kind of triangulate by putting filters in a lot of places. So yeah, it's just one way to stay aware of it. You can judge a lot by what you smell when you go outside, what the amount of smoke you see, and how your body reacts, right? So if it says green and you go outside and you smell smoke, you might think, oh, maybe it's like a yellow or an orange or maybe a red or a purple, who knows? But it's just one way of doing that. And then the last thing, I sort of already talked about this with introducing steam, but another really important thing to consider is just your mucous membranes more generally. And this is something that you can work on ahead of time, right? So you've probably, if you've been looking at herb classes or reading herb, what am I trying to like, wow, the word just left me. Handouts or any kind of preparation for COVID stuff, you've seen a lot about mucous membrane health. And so I'm just gonna reiterate some of the stuff that you've probably already seen, but you want to keep your mucous membranes supple. So you want them to be producing some mucus, and you just want to stay hydrated. So you'll be needing to drink a lot more water when there's ambient smoke in the air. And that helps with elimination as well. And you will also, so some herbs that we're going to talk about them, but the first one that comes to mind is mullein for me, for lung demulcency and mucous membrane health, and then basically marshmallow root. And that depends where you live. If you live in a more humid place, you might not want to use marshmallow. It can trap things in by being too slimy. But I think for the Bay Area or Southern California, I've seen it be helpful for people. So, okay. And then let's see. And then Madeline's going to talk about DIY air filtration for a second.
Yeah. So part of this, like, how do we have access to clean air question, we're talking about some of the obvious constraints in terms of like, if you don't have an inside place to be, you're not going to have the container to be able to purify air in. But beyond that too, air purifiers can be incredibly expensive. And so there's a way that there's a pretty good hack for the person who needs or wants some kind of filtration for their house that doesn't have access to $400 or $500 for a fancy HEPA filter. And the way that I've seen that work pretty well is with a box fan fitted with a HEPA filter, the kind that goes inside of an AC system. These two components can be taped together, and so you're running the the box fan in a way that it's pulling the air through the HEPA filter. And in pulling the air through the HEPA filter, you're getting a really similar level of filtration that you would be from a fancy HEPA filtration device. It just is not as cute, or maybe cute in a different way. And so this is something that can be a really good tool if you're looking for a budget filtration system. You're going to get more bang for your buck building something like this than you are buying an inexpensive air filter. And the folks at the hardware store can kind of like direct you in terms of which filter to get. And they come in a huge range of sizes, so you kind of get one that approximates the size of the filter of the fan that you have. And also within this air filtration question, like I mean, in an ideal world, everyone would have like whole house filtration or something, but like that's not really the reality almost anywhere. So second best is really, especially now that people are home on a regular basis with because of some of these shelter in place and work from home things that are happening with the pandemic. If you can keep the filter in the room that you're in, if you're in your living room during the day working, then move your filter into your living room. And then if you're and then move it into your bedroom at night. Alternatively, just keeping your filter in your bedroom. So at the very minimum, if you're getting that filtered air during the restorative sleep part of your life, that's a great option. Some people actually find the noise of the fan to be kind of like a white noise that can support sleep, which can be hard to come by these days. So those are just some tricks in terms of wanting to bump up from just being in an inside space to being in a filtered air space. Another trick would be to buy the kind of foam tape that you can just refresh the seals on your windows, so your windows are really getting a good seal. That's another pretty inexpensive way to make your house a little bit more airtight so that you're keeping smoky air outside.
And if another thing that can be helpful is breathing exercises, and it kind of goes beyond the scope of the class to talk about that in detail, but we wanted to give a shout out to corpusritual.com. I'll type it in. They have breathing exercises available. And then the next thing is just having a bug out bag or bug out life, right? Like, and Madeline's going to talk about that right now.
Okay, so this is a resource that I have compiled mostly from the readyforwildfire.org fire site, and I've tweaked it a little bit, mostly just in terms of graphic design, just because I feel like it's a lot more accessible to have something that's simple and clear rather than something that has like all these fire emojis and red background and crazy font when you're trying to look at something to figure out what your plan for evacuation is. So this resource is available in your Eventbrite. There's a link to be able to download it. It also is on my website and will remain there permanently on the tools portion of my site. So I'm going to share my screen and walk you through that right now, and then I'll show you the document, and I'm just going to go over it really briefly. The intention of this resource is that it's something that you all can download and fill out for yourself to create a plan that works for you, and then have it in hard copy as something that you can reference when you have 5 minutes to evacuate, when you have 15 minutes to evacuate, when you have an hour to evacuate, to say like, hey, what do I need to grab that maybe I'm not thinking of right now because I'm a little bit scared? And what do I have to grab in the amount of time that I have? And also this gives you a tool that you can practice with. So a potential homework assignment between now and next time is, what would it be like to do that 5-minute fire drill? Takes 5 minutes, right? Take 5 minutes out of your day and say, okay, if I had to go and I have these 5 minutes, what would that look like? And it's really important when you do that exercise that you also pack time in afterwards to take care of yourself, because that's a high stress thing to put into your day. And so to be able to back that up and be like, okay, like there's not a fire. This is, if you need that time to re-regulate, to really know that and give that to yourself. Okay, give me 1 second to jump in with this tech stuff so you can see what I'm sharing. Okay. So, hello and welcome to my website. So in this tools section, this is a bunch of different free resources. And the first one is this fire preparedness checklist. So we'll put it on the Bayheart site, but it isn't there right now. And so you can click download here. And you also can go to the Ready for Wildfire site and see all of the resources that they have that are a lot of what I compiled. And this is kind of what the preparedness checklist looks like. Okay, so now I'm gonna show you the actual resource itself in full. Let me just jump back in here. Okay, can y'all see that? Okay, great. So this front page is your page of like all of the things that if you had a lot of time, you would do to prepare the place that you live. If you lived in, this is really oriented around people who live in houses, whether or not you're owning or renting, it's still relevant to you. Also, some of these things are going to be relevant if you live in an apartment. But things like turning off the gas, putting a ladder against your roof to make it easier for firefighters, shutting windows. I want to take a minute here to say that pets are at the end of this checklist. Maybe if I had to do it over again, I would put them at the top. A lot of people have a hard time catching their pets when they're evacuating, or don't have time. I know in the fires that have happened in Sonoma County, a lot of pets have been lost in some pretty sad ways. And so having a plan specifically around your pets, even if it's as simple as making sure that they are out of the house if you can't catch them, or that you open the barn door so that they can go outside, or the coop door or whatever. In the area where I live, which is part of the burn zone, the only horses that passed away were horses that got locked in a barn. And so horses are like gonna have an easy time navigating. Like there were some singed tails, but when we're talking about big livestock, which might be relevant to you, might not be relevant to you, but is definitely relevant in this area, just getting them into the outdoors, they're gonna do an okay job taking care of themselves if you don't have time to actually load them into a trailer and evacuate, which takes a lot of time, especially when you're nervous, animals are nervous. Doing that in a safe way takes grounding and time. So if you are trying to catch animals and are super anxious, it might not actually be in the best interest of the animal to do that. You might be better off leaving them and trusting that they'll be okay. Okay, so that's our ready. Our set is kind of what your plan is for how you get out, where you're meeting your people, any contact numbers that you might need. And the go is, what are my things that I absolutely need to take? So in the 5-minute plan, you have your 6 Ps, people and pets, papers, prescriptions, pictures, and it continues. And then the last part of this handout is kind of helping you gauge what are the other things that you would like to bring if you had more time. And you can color code it in terms of, these are the things I could take if I had 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, and practice to see if that's actually reasonable. And something that I've learned as a Taurus who loves my things and puts a lot of emotion and memory into objects is that even if you lose everything, you'll be okay and you'll still have those memories. And that was kind of surprising to me, to be honest, that like I still had so much of what I felt like I lost initially. So that's a takeaway. And so I really highly recommend, my family is going to be doing this week. I really highly recommend you filling out this form or a form similar to it if you live in a fire zone. And maybe your priorities are really different than other people that you live with, and that's really good to get clear on. Okay, so I'm going to stop our screen sharing. So I'd like to just share for a few minutes, if you all will indulge me, about what it has been like to be impacted by a fire personally and what it has taught me that I would like to pass on from firsthand experience. The first thing that I learned is that even as a person who is pretty grounded, has some solid care practices, that going through a fire was incredibly destabilizing and took me a lot longer to get centered than I would have thought that it should or that I would have liked it to. And that's okay. It is a big kind of trauma. And in Sonoma County, we're really seeing there's a reason that free therapy resources are still being distributed to communities directly impacted by the 2017 fires. So that's 3 years ago. Is that these are long-lasting patterns that they take some time to work through, and it doesn't matter if you actually fled the fire and lost your house or if you didn't. It's carrying through community in similar ways, and telling yourself that someone had it worse, so I shouldn't be feeling the feelings as big as I am is not really productive. And that's something that I've seen happen across the board for a lot of people. Another thing that I learned is that the insurance and rebuilding process is hard and takes a long time. And that while you're still in it, like still rebuilding, still recovering, your community doesn't necessarily remember that because the fire was put out more than a year ago or whatever. And so having that be okay, and also feeling comfortable reminding the people that are your support system that even if it's not something that they're still in, that it's something that you're still in, as a way to be held in that experience is really important. And I also would say that knowing that the people in your life that are impacted by fire or have been impacted by fire, if they or if your community is experiencing any kind of fire related thing in this moment, that they might be having a harder time right now. So that's a great opportunity to reach out to those people. Maybe they call themselves fire survivors, maybe they don't, but those people are going to be experiencing or might be experiencing some kind of remembrance of old feelings. And also, if that is you, those times where the energy of that bigger and more painful experience is coming up in these other fires is an opportunity to move it. And so one of the things that can be really difficult about the trauma around fire is that it's really big fear, and that can get really stuck. And so letting that fear actually move and be felt fully and move out of you, it takes time. And these moments where fire comes back into your consciousness or comes back into your olfactory system, whether it's because you blow out a candle or because there's a small brush fire near your house, these are moments to let it move. And it's okay if the reaction doesn't seem proportional, because it's not actually about the candle or the brush fire. So those are some of my kind of like takeaways. So it can take a long time to ground, even with support, but that support is really critical. You don't have to lose everything to be deeply impacted. It's normal for it to come back up. People with healthcare challenges have a harder time in the smoke. And also, I for this emotional piece, even if it's your closet that is the place that is smallest that you can really do a good enough job cleaning the air in, or keeping doors closed, that this is the place that's far enough away from the outside world that it doesn't smell like smoke. It's very helpful during fire season to have a place that doesn't smell like smoke, for your nervous system to be able to remember, I'm not like the fire. I don't need to run away from this fire right now. It's not like right here, it's over there, and I'm safe. The remembering in your body, in your animal body, that you're safe is something to come back to as any person who is experiencing the smell of smoke in combination with fear. And the fear itself is big and it's old. It's not even a human fear. It's a fear that has evolved, like, that predates our speciation itself. And so it's important to be gentle with yourself around it, because we're so programmed to smell smoke and want to go, to distance ourselves from that smoke experience. And for us to stay in the same place experiencing that smoke is something that the body can have a really hard time understanding. And that's because those reactions are trying to protect you. So understanding these fear responses is a part of a pattern of protection, even if it's one that's not serving you, is really can be really helpful for kind of coming back. Yeah, thank you for letting me share a little. And I also just want to offer that if you are impacted by smoke and you need support, I'm still offering care as a free resource, so please reach out. And Stasha, on to you, talking about preparations.
Thank you for sharing all of that. It's really helpful to remember about the somatic part of smoke, and I thought it was great that you had the reminder of your body trying to protect you with the feeling of wanting to run. We will be talking about that a lot more next week when we talk about the nervous system a little bit more in depth. So just to switch gears a little bit, we're going to just go through some different preparations. So if y'all remember what we talked about in terms of like what kinds of symptoms we see, remembering that kind of list, what kinds of preparations can you think of that would be helpful? I'm just going to wait 1 minute for people to type things into the chat. I'm like going to be that person who requires participation. Apologies. What I mean is like tinctures, teas, honey, exactly. Thank you. Honey is a great one. We can start there while we keep get them going. So honeys are amazing for the mucous membranes. You can extract most plants in honeys, and it has the added benefit of being its own medicine, right? Next, someone said essential oil kit. What do you mean by kit? I'll wait and I'll come back to it. So tea, right? I think in case we don't know how to do teas, I'm just going to go through. So with fresh herbs, we are going to do an infusion, right? And Nadia says with dry herbs, we're going to do decoctions. And so one thing that's really important if you are going to use marshmallow, which we will talk about again next week, is doing a suspended cold infusion. So that gets out the mucilage. Heat kind of tears apart the polysaccharide chains, and so you want to do a cold infusion of things that you want to be goopy. So you can do that by pouring like room temperature water and letting it sit overnight. You could put it in the refrigerator, and what you want is the slime. So herbs that are slimy, marshmallow root's a good one. And a lot of herbs have slime, and if you do it with a cold infusion, it will help. It also helps to drink something cooling, perhaps, while it's quite hot. So you can add spearmint to it. You can add things for flavor, and it will extract. So you tend to want to do, we think of infusions as hot, but for the mucilage, we want them to be cold. And yeah, these are all great suggestions. So we kind of talked about it a little bit already, but the herbal steams. So you'll put the same way that you would introduce steam ambiently to the area. You would just get a pot, you would boil water, you would take it off the heat, and then you would make sort of a towel sauna over your head. Careful not to get so close to the steam that you burn your face. And you would breathe in the steam. So you're kind of making a face steam room, and you can introduce herbs to that. So sometimes we want volatile oils. Sometimes we, generally if we're doing a steam, we want volatile oils. So consider it a direct application of antimicrobial constituents to the lungs. So it's basically like putting salve on your lungs or something, or putting a topical on your lungs, which can be helpful to lubricate the mucous membranes. And we're going to go into this in more detail, but the reason you want them to be lubricated is to preserve the elasticity of the lungs, which allows more surface area for gas exchange. Right, so someone wrote Nettie. So yeah, nasal sprays or nasal rinses are also helpful for the upper respiratory tract. So steams also are introducing moisture into the upper respiratory tract, but nasal sprays are helpful. So one that I make is you would use about 70% distilled water, 75% distilled water, and then 12.5% glycerin, And then 12.5% yerba manzа, which is a sort of harder herb to locate or source. So we'll talk more about it next week, and I'll repeat the recipe. But basically, this is a direct application of herbs into the sinus cavity, and you don't want to put tincture up your nose, right? That will burn. It's hard enough to do a neti pot with water, but the distilled water and glycerin can help keep the herbs on the mucous membranes and create a direct application. Any questions so far? I do use tincture, yep. But you could do a tea. It would just be a little bit more challenging to preserve it, right? So you'd have to change it out. I think if you were gonna do a tea, you would do more of like a neti pot rinse with the tea. Other things are tinctures. So a cold infusion, you just put room temperature water and you let it sit between 8 and 12 hours. You could put it in the refrigerator, especially if you live in a hot place, because sometimes they'll go, you only have about 24 hours to use them before they'll start to be a little funky. So you can keep them in the refrigerator for up to 2 days. But they will start to like ferment a little bit, or they just get a little funky. And that's true for all teas. So other preparations are tinctures. So tinctures, like as a broad definition, is basically plant matter in a solvent. Sometimes that solvent is alcohol, sometimes it's vinegar. And so you would do, there's many different preparations, but that's kind of a quick way to get herbs into your body in a standardized amount. And we'll go over that more. The other things are flower essences, which we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail in a second. And then also the last thing is compresses. So you can use tea bags of chamomile, which I've found to be very helpful for irritated eyes from the smoke. So you can kind of pour hot water over a tea bag, just a really small amount, maybe like 2 ounces or something, let it soak, and then put the tea bag directly on your eye. That's the way to have a compress, kind of a self-contained compress. But if you have loose leaf chamomile, you can make sure that you strain the herb out quite well, and then place a washcloth in it, and then place that over your eyes. You usually try to keep your eyes closed, but you can kind of, with chamomile, you could blink. If you have an aster allergy, obviously avoid that, but for most people, that's pretty effective and helpful. Anything that I forgot, Madeline?
I just said in the chat to be sure you make the chamomile tea bag cool enough before you apply it. But I think that that's great. And I think we'll be getting a little bit more in depth next time too. So.
And so is everyone, in case
Annie says that this is also a good remedy for too much Zoom, which is really true. The chamomile tea bags are great for eye strain. Go ahead, Stasha.
Oh, I was just going to talk about flower essences briefly, since we touched on some of the emotional aspects of fire, and I think Madeline will talk about a few others, but ones that I've seen be really effective during wildfire season and with my clients is Scotch broom flower essence, which, how do I talk about Scotch broom? It's kind of for like the fear of like existential and so like doom based on like of how do I, you think of it for like activists who have fought and lost, basically, like people who've lost something, like a sense of worry and fear for what is to come in the world. It doesn't make the thing better necessarily, but it makes you able to function around that fear of collapse, basically, or whatever you want to say about that. And another one is Yarrow Environmental Solution. And so that's made by the Flower Essence Society, I think, and they do a lot of California flower essences. And that one is made in a saltwater base as opposed to a preserved spring water. And it's just helpful for kind of having a bubble and keeping out chemical exposure. Another one that, and obviously these have a lot more uses. I'm just thinking about the ways that I've seen them be helpful during wildfire season specifically. So another one is mimulus, and you can think of Bach flower essences as like the primary colors, and then the Flower Essence Society, the Alaskan essences, and the desert essences, etc., as kind of like the direct, like the exact shade or something like that. So they tend to be broader, the Bach flower essences. And mimulus is for just fear that you can name, right? So in a broad sense, that would be like, I am afraid my house will burn down, or I am afraid of getting sick from this smoke. It just helps with lessen that fear. Madeline? There's a bunch more. I think it's really important. Sorry. There's a bunch more. I mean, there are so many flower essences and so many emotions in a human, and so many varying types of emotion that whatever way you deal with and cope with what's happening around you can be eased by like the exact shade of flower essence. I'm just going to answer the how do you use a flower essence question, and then I will transition to you, Madeline. Sorry to do that. So a flower essence is a very, very, very diluted, it's like an energetic imprint of a plant. And you can do it a couple of ways. You can make yourself a formula and then put that in your water bottle. You can put it in a spray, but essentially you want to ingest a small amount of it multiple times throughout the day. And there's lots of different ways that people use flower essences. Sometimes people use flower essences. Sometimes people use drop doses of tinctures as flower essences. There's some nitty-gritty differentials there. And basically you are being imbued with the personality of the plant would be like one way to think about it. But it's small doses frequently. So one way that you can do it, if you wanted to work with mimulus, for example, you would put 4 drops in your water bottle and just know that you're taking a dose of it every time you sip from your water bottle. You can put it in the bath, etc. Okay, Madeline.
Cool. Yeah, one thing that I realized I forgot to say at the beginning is that Stasha and I are herbalists that come from different herbal traditions. So Stasha, I think, would describe themselves as kind of a little bit of a Michael Moorian herbalist, working in that tradition, and as such uses higher doses than I do as someone who is trained with Karen and Sarah of the Blue Otter School as my primary teachers. And so even though we use plants in similar ways, often our dosing is a little bit different. So these are some flower essences that Stasha just talked about, and I'm going to talk about a flower essence that I've really appreciated for fire season, and then I'm also going to talk a little bit about some spirit herbs that can be used as essence, but that I more often will use as drop doses of tincture. And the way that I think about drop dosing tinctures comes from experience, and then I think is part of what brought me to the Blue Otter School was that the way that they speak about plants was what made sense with my embodied experience of what the plants did for me, which is that in these smaller doses, the emotional and spiritual properties of a plant are louder, and the more drops of tincture or droppers of tincture you are taking, the more those properties drop out and you're getting more of the physical action of the plant. Does that make sense to people? Okay. So talking about these herbs to support emotion within fire season, a big one that maybe seems kind of that I don't really hear talked about that much is just like creating the feeling of home and safety. And one that I've found can really bring that for people in a kind of unexpected way is cinnamon. Cinnamon across many cultures has memories of snickerdoodles or arroz con leche or um, so many different desserts globally utilize this spice, and it has become something that I think for a lot of people recalls childhood and their family kitchen and this sense of hearth and home. And so if you or someone you're working with has that relationship with cinnamon, it can be a plant that you can do a cold infusion with actually and get that really beautiful mucilage. But you also can use it as, and if you did that, you could take it as just a sip as opposed to just a drop or a few drops to get the spirit properties. But you also can take it as tincture and in like 1 to 3 to 5 drops, to 1 being the strongest, to just bring in that memory of home into your body. So that is a particularly great plant to work with if you're working with someone or if you are in the moment of actively being displaced, to bring that memory into your body. And another one I really like is plantain. And this is not the really delicious fruit, but the plantago lanceolata or ovada that we see in lawns nationally, and in some ways globally. It's a plant that has really spread around the world with colonization. And in drop doses, I love plantain for a feeling of overwhelm. So when you have a lot thrown at you, the plantain can help you integrate that in a way that it is assimilable and that you can be with it. In a similar way that in the physical, plantain is great for kind of like pus infections, that where you have like an excess of pathogen in your system, that plantain can work with as a biofilm buster in a lot of different first aid applications. And then mullein we'll talk about in the physical later, but we have to talk about mullein in the emotional and spiritual too, because not only is mullein supporting our respiratory system in the physical, also our lungs are a place where so many people hold grief. And also the mullein in the spirit doses can not only help us hold the grief, but hold it in a way where we feel held. The mullein has such a amazing capacity, these like furry big really leaves, to give us a cocoon of safety in which to do this grief work. I want to talk about angelica because one of the things that happens in fire season is an unknown. And within this unknown, especially for people whose childhoods maybe didn't offer them a sense of safety and security, that or have experiences that touch on this feeling as familiar, that feeling of being out of control can be incredibly uncomfortable. And the angelica in drop doses as tincture or as essence can be really helpful in reminding us not only of our power, but of what we do have control over, and to kind of put us in our bodies in a way that we are reminded of all of the choices that we do have, to return us a sense of agency and a sense of calm and groundedness that comes with that. I spoke a little bit earlier about this feeling of petrified fear and the way that fear can get stuck. And desert alchemy has an essence called rainbow cactus, or sometimes rainbow barrel cactus, I've seen it called. And they describe it on their website as a searchlight to illuminate something dark or held in, releasing petrified emotion without becoming entangled in it. We emerge bright, free, and whole. And in the aftermath of fire, the process of letting that fear that sometimes can get held so deeply, fear for yourself, fear for your loved ones, fear for the animal people who are losing their homes, and an unknown future, to let that go in the face of a future that is still uncertain in so many ways can be really challenging. And I personally have never had a more profound experience with an essence than with the rainbow barrel cactus. So I think that's a really good one to have in your toolkit for working with that really stuck emotion. And then the last one I want to talk about is redwood. Not only is redwood a plant that has evolved to be a part of fire in this area, but redwood has big grounding energy at the same time as it has this really erect and upward energy. And so I think of it as kind of like helping a person integrate into the vertical, and it can be really helpful in supporting action if you're just feeling a little bit lost in it all. The redwood can help you come back to yourself in that kind of vertical energetic integration, and I love it as a tool in that place. So this is, like Stasha said, just a taste of some of the plants that can be used to support the emotional and spiritual body as we're entering fire season and during the experience and after the experience of fire. And there isn't a complete list, and these aren't the only plants, and there's so much to be said for looking at what is available to you and asking the plants that are around you in your garden how they can support you in the moments that you're going through. Or if you're displaced in the parking lot of the evacuation center that you're in. I just want to come back into the actual direct relationship with the plants for 1 second and just remind everyone that the generosity of the plants in giving their medicine is really huge, and that there is a lot of support to be had in unexpected places, in just the listening and the sitting with them and the asking, even if you don't have the resources to make a cup of tea. That's it for me.
Thank you. Before we go into questions, just want to say a couple of things. So before next class, if y'all want to take the time to fill out the sheet that Madeline made, or think about filling out the sheet, or see if other people want to fill out the sheet, you could do that. And next time we're going to talk about body systems and then some specific herbs. So we'll be doing more like materia medica, which is like direct like a monograph of the herbs and how they relate to our bodies as we are working through smoke inhalation. We're going to talk about the chemicals in plants and or chemicals in wildfire smoke. And yeah, so we know we didn't do a ton of talking about herbs, but we will get there. And just a reminder that the reason why we're doing it this way is that holistic care involves thinking about the context. So the context is really important. And one other thing to say is that so because Madeline and Sam are living in Santa Rosa where they're rolling blackouts, it may be that we are not able to do a live class for the next one. Hopefully we will, but just we want you to know that there's a contingency plan. So if the power is out, we will figure out a way to just record the class and then send it to you. Like we'll do the class as though you were here, but hopefully that won't be the case. So just please come on August 30th and just, you know, it's very topical, I guess, what we're talking about, the flexibility that you need when during this season. So, okay, we have maybe 5 minutes for questions.
There was a question that arose earlier about masks and like different kinds of masks, pros and cons of each one, and sort of your take on like what good mask might be, both for fire preparation and then also holding in the context of COVID.
I'm sorry, I was completely distracted. Did anybody else hear that insane lightning in Oakland? There's like a crazy thunder. It was very loud. It shook my whole house.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sasha, do you wanna tackle the mask question as a part of our deeper into smoke next time? We'll kind of get into that when we're talking about like aldehydes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that would be good because then we can talk about which chemicals specifically, which either one will help with. Mm-hmm. And then a question is, does anybody have advice on fire preparedness practices for unhoused neighbors? Yeah, so I do a wound care clinic first and third Sundays, and so we spend a lot of time like talking to people about their fears and frustrations around that. And I mean, I think just any of, you know, making sure that there's masks for people, offering moments of filtered air, like a place for them to be inside, which is obviously definitely harder with COVID, if not near impossible. And that's a good, yeah, there's a bunch of different ways to address this issue. I'm thinking about it on the, like probably the most surface level, which is like someone asks you for something, what do you do, right? And I think that tea could be really helpful if you prepare it with COVID safe practices and give them cups that they can keep or throw away. You could, one thing that people have been, I've been seeing people use with success is like these essential oil inhalers. They're kind of, they like, I'll try to get a link to it for next time so y'all can see. You can order them and you put one drop in and it sits on this salt, and then people can breathe it in as a kind of aromatherapy or also as a direct application of volatile oils to the lungs on the go. Those are some of the things that come to my mind off the top of my head.
Abigail had a question too about breathing exercises. And I guess in terms of like, is it a preparation or a in the moment thing? It can be both. And also, while breathwork is super powerful, it is super powerful. And so if, like in the same way that I make a point in classes of not like mandating everyone take a deep breath, assuming that will be a grounding and centering exercise for everyone, because it isn't for everyone. breath work might be something that opens up places in yourself or your history that actually are harder and that aren't really places that you want to touch in that moment. And so for some people, breathwork is really a possible entry point to working with past trauma that requires a lot of holding to embark upon. And so that's probably not the place that you want to go for supporting yourself in an acute situation if it's going to bring up something else for you. So it takes, it's breathwork is an invitation of a practice that might work well for some people, but it's not going to be a perfect solution for everyone. And I just want to say that too.
We have a few more questions. Thank you, Madeline. Around like contraindications with plants, particularly like a question about contraindications using essential oils if one has asthma, which is totally possible. Many things can trigger asthma, but I'm curious around your thoughts around that. And also the question from Anna, is it advisable to take bronchodilating herbs while the smoke is in the air, or better take them after the smoke has passed? And yeah, I'm wondering if that's also related to like the question about like what we can do with our unhoused communities, is like what might be the role of like steams or like support in the moment of smoke and then after the smoke has passed.
Yeah, I think these are all super good questions. And the one about bronchodilating herbs is one that I've heard a lot and that we're going to address in the next class. And so I think probably we won't answer these questions right now because we're going to be getting to them. And so we're taking note of them and we'll make sure that we get to them next time.
I think we can probably handle just the one about triggering asthma attacks. So yes, sometimes if people put their face too close to the steam or there's too much volatile oil, the lungs can have a quick spasm. And so you can kind of mediate that. If you know that you're triggered by, if you tend toward asthma, you may want to avoid that. But it can be helpful to have your face farther away. It's more like if you are taking a big breath of very, like anybody would cough, right? But so sometimes that can trigger an asthma attack. I'm pretty sure that's what you are asking. And I'll double check on that for next time as well. But I just wanted to say that I saw that. And then the last thing we have time for is that there's, someone said, overuse of herbs right now strain on plant communities. So just, yeah, to be aware of where you're sourcing herbs, the amount you're using, and trying to, we can really go into more detail about that, but in the next class, ethics of plant use. You want to, so thank you all for coming.
Yeah. Yeah, so Samwise is going to bring us home. And also Jackie has a question about closed captioning. We're working on sending a recording out with closed captioning, but we don't currently have the tools to be able to do that with the live class. If anyone has really good resources to help us learn how to do that, we would love them, and you can email us. So thank you, Jackie, for saying that. And we also, yeah, we acknowledge that in the email that we sent you all last night too. Okay, so Samwise.
Yeah, thank you so much to our great teachers, Stasha and Madeline. This is really beautiful and super informative and just such good information. So thank you so much for teaching. And yeah, I wanted to share that all three of us, myself and Stasha and Madeline, are part of the Bay Area Herbal Response Team, which is a collective of herbalists, mostly in Northern California, who initially came together to respond to the pandemic and has morphed into a collective that is offering both like acute herbal care through a hotline, which I can drop the number in the chat at the end, offering classes and kits for our communities that are experiencing really intense violence or systemic oppression, or are more impacted in various ways. So yeah, if you feel called to support our work, it would, yeah, we want to say thank you to the folks who showed up and offered money, energy to be a part of this class. We also feel like it's very important to be able to offer these teachings freely, so that everyone can have access to this information. And if you're inspired and you want more folks to have access to the really like life affirming information about how to like deal with fire times and how to be alive and vibrant and supporting of our communities in times of great tumult and change, then we welcome if you would love to give another donation so that we can continue offering this work freely and accessibly to folks. And yeah, we see on the screen that our classes are split 50-50 with like a partner organization, and this class we are sharing the donations with IndocuFund, which is a really amazing organization that supports undocumented folks, both in the face of fire and also in the context of the pandemic. So yeah, if your spirit feels alive with generosity, in receiving the gifts of the knowledge of experience that both Sasha and Madeline have shared with us, and you want to provide more access to that, you can make donations through our website, which is, I will drop in the chat as well. And yeah, and we look forward to continuing this conversation next week. I really would like to share. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you so much for joining us all. Thanks for your patience with the tech issues. It's a journey. Thanks for being with us through crazy lightning storms. Who knew? But yeah, again, really grateful for your presence and all the shared wisdom that was here today. So thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye.